Hello, everybody, and welcome to Mad Security's webinar series. My name is Cliff Neve. I'll be the moderator. Today's webinar is entitled Good Day for Ransomware. We have Mad Security's very own Don Sumner here, as well as Kevin Walsh, who's a very special guest from our partner SecureWorks. Mad and SecureWorks have been since 2014, and we're really excited to continue that relationship. And first, I'd like to go ahead and introduce Don Sumner. And I'll go ahead and put up the some slides here. Here we go. All right, hopefully everybody can see that. So Don, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. Well, and contrary to any evidence you may see on the screen, I am not the second Kevin Walsh. My name is Don Sumner. I'm with Mad Security. I've been with Mad Security about 5 years, but I was actually with SecureWorks for 15 years before that. So partnering with SecureWorks now has been really great, really effective. And every time we have some kind of meeting about something, it's like old home week. So I'm happy to be here.
Great, thanks very much, Don. And at this point in time, I'd like to go ahead and introduce Kevin. Kevin, you want to go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself? You have a pretty amazing background.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Don. Thanks, Cliff. Appreciate it. Happy to be here. Appreciate you having me. As mentioned, my name's Kevin Walsh. I'm a senior consultant with SecureWorks, and my title is Incident Commander. I've been with SecureWorks just about 2 years now, and I'm currently a member of the Cyber Incident Response Team, and we're assisting customers with large cyber incidents. Prior to joining SecureWorks, I spent 23 years in the Secret Service as a special agent with them. 13 of them were supervising and leading many different sections, including investigative sections. Spent some time in the President's Detail. I actually started my career in New York. Spent 5 years doing investigations there before transferring down to the President's Detail, and spent 5 years with President Bush. I went out to our training facility and taught vulnerability assessments for a couple of years there, or just short of 2 years, and then promoted back to go to the President's Detail and was a supervisor on President Bush and President Obama. Spent some time in headquarters. And then the last 7 was down in Atlanta, where I am now, and I was leading the Electronic Crimes Task Force here down in Atlanta, again, investigating large cyber crimes and helping companies out. If you could go to the next slide, Cliff.
Okay, should be there.
So I mentioned that I was on the President's Detail, and I'm sure a lot of you may have thought or asked yourself, what does presidential protection have to do with cybersecurity? And as we talk about it today, we want you to think about a couple of different things. And I kind of draw from those experiences as my time on the detail and in protection, which spent a lot of time doing that along with investigations. So in order to protect the president, vice president, former or foreign heads of state, we need to rely on several things. And it's really the layers or rings of security, which really ties into defense and debt, which we'll talk about a lot today. But as you'll see throughout this process, the layer and rings are really important, and no one aspect of this layer or ring by itself would be successful. So we need to rely on not only many different layers or rings, but also many different people as well. So it's incredibly important as we go through this to understand that and keep that in mind. And I also want you to do something different as Don and I and Cliff go through this today. I want you to change your mindset a little bit. What I'd like for you to do as we talk about this, we're going to talk about a little bit about how we got here with the ransomware, some of the trends we're seeing, and really dive into what we're seeing. But what I want you to do differently today in changing your mindset is I don't want you to just sit here and listen. We're going to have some polling questions interactive. But I really want you to insert yourself. I want you to insert yourself to the situations we talk about. I want you to insert yourself into the incidents we talk about. Do you know who you would talk to? Do you know if you have the resources you need? What would you do in these situations? These are going to be some uncomfortable things we talk about. We're going to talk about companies that have had some serious uncomfortable situations in cyber incident. So really take a different look at it today. So I really want you to immerse yourself as we go through these things. And as we talk about these defense in depth, ask yourself, do we have this? Do we need this? What else could we be doing better? So what we talk about in protection is you can't stop everything. Same thing in cyber. We can't stop everything. But you know what you can have? You can have a plan and know how you're going to react. So as we talk about things, ask yourself, is this in your plan? Do you know how you would react? So kind of, I want you to kind of insert yourself into your layers and rings of security and kind of be the Secret Service agent for cyber as we go through this. So I think you'll get a lot of that. I know Don and Cliff have got some great things as well. So.
Great. Well, thanks very much for that, Kevin. It's always been fun to share some of the shared White House experiences as well. At this point, what I want to do is go ahead and launch a poll question. And it should have launched at this point. And essentially, this question is: do you know what the first steps you would take if your company was hit by ransomware? You know, we all talk about ransomware. We all know and see the different elements in the news. But if your company was to be hit with ransomware, what would be the first several steps that your company would do? Do you just have no idea? Do you have loose plans? Do you have formal plans? Anything in between? And so I'll keep this up here a little bit and see where that goes. Okay. I think we are coming up on a quorum, so I'll go ahead and close it out and share the responses. So Don, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, definitely have some. You know, unlike Kevin and even Cliff, who have really amazing technical backgrounds, I'm more in the field. I talk to probably, I don't know, 20 to 25 companies of various types every week, and interact more on the business side rather than the technology side. And based on what I hear when I'm talking with a lot of folks, I'm not surprised by the fact that there's a good number of people that really have no idea what the first three steps would be. Having the formal plan and having exercised it, which was really second place, that is really great. The ones, of course, I hear from are the ones that are caught off guard, right? And that's where it's really scary, and that's where a lot of the things that happen right afterwards, you know, we're going to go through today. And you know, most of us are aware of the really large, very recent ransom attacks. There's big ones, and they make the news, and they make us hitting gas lines and all of that stuff. But we don't hear much about the small businesses, and they're targeted a lot. They're targeted just as readily, but they're just not making the New York Times.
Gotcha. And so, you know, and that's a great point, because we hear about the big ones, and DHS recently came out with a survey that said 65% of small businesses didn't feel as though they were particularly susceptible to ransomware, which those of us in the field know that means that 60% of businesses don't really understand ransomware, how it works, and what's going on out there in the field. So, so Kevin, what I want to do is have you walk us through the state of ransomware a little bit, and let's see if I can get this up here. Hopefully that's showing. So, Kevin, you want to walk us through kind of where we are and what you're seeing?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, the title of the slide says it all. How did we get here? You know, and you see from 2013 to 18, more mass distribution, single host, targeting individuals, and not that didn't affect people. You know, there are horror stories along those lines as well, not just businesses on a personal level. One of my friends, close friends from high school, tragically lost their son in a car accident. And a year and a half later, they were hit on their home computer with ransomware and lost all the photos they had of their only child, you know, forced to pay to get it back. So it hit his home as well. Now moving 2015 and forward, you see more of the post intrusion. Now it's more targeting, and we'll talk about targeting in a minute, but targeting the enterprise. Don, I think the screen, looks a little blurry there.
Screen die
But
on me?
yeah, but it's fine. 2015 forward, we see more targeting the enterprise, more attacking businesses, and we see that. And what we've seen with that is we've seen data exfiltration, we've seen longer dwell times, we've seen more lateral movement, really more encompassing the network. So it's important to understand that you see the change. But the other thing that we have seen change is ransomware inflation as well. Don, I think you can go to the next slide. Yeah, that's a little blurry. I'm not sure. There we go. That's perfect. So largest known single payment of $40 million. And so now that's the attention grabber. That's what Don talked about. You know, you see the big ones and those are the hit. Every ransomware, $40 million? Absolutely not. Not every ransomware is $15 million for that aspect. But we have seen ransomware inflation where it was not too long ago that the ransomware demands were under $1 million. You know, we're in the thousands. And now we consistently see higher and higher demands. And again, with that inflation in the past, larger scale, I'm trying to hit, you know, people and see if I can get them for $10, $15, $20,000, $60,000. Well, now with the inflation, let me just hit 10 people, and if I can hit them for over $100,000 or up to $1 million, I only need to have a successful ransomware attack of 3 people, meaning the victims are going to engage and pay. So we've seen this with cyber insurance. We've seen ransomware inflation. So again, the 40 million there is the eye catcher that's supposed to grab you, but it is large amounts, and they have continued to increase. And with that being said, since 2018, we've done over 230 ransomware engagements, and Cliff and Don have talked about, you know, small businesses. That's what we're seeing that are hit all the time, and they're not the ones that make the news. And we talked about name and shaming, and 2,600 plus organizations are listed on public leak sites, and we'll talk about name and shaming in a little bit as well. Next slide, Cliff, please. As I said, we currently are tracking 32 active name and shame groups and 11 active ransomware as a service. So again, we talked about our defense in depth, our layers or rings of security. You talk about business models that we have. The threat actors also have kind of a business model. You have certain ones that are actually infiltrating the system, then they're selling access. You have the ransomware as a service. And now, in order to try and put that pressure on you, increase that pressure per se, to kind of tighten the screws a little bit to get you to pay. If you're not going to pay and you think, oh, I can restore from my backups, oh, well, now, by the way, we've now added name and shaming. So the data that we have exfiltrated from your company, we are now going to put on a public leak site if you don't pay us any money. So we're trying to have a twofold approach. If you're okay with ransomware, well, how do you feel about your public data? So again, going back to what I said in the beginning, as we're sitting here talking about this, and I'm sure you've heard about the name and shaming and some of the leak sites, but now think about it from your company's perspective. How would your company respond or react if not only you're hit with ransomware, but now your data is about to be released? Do you know what your steps and processes that you would take, you know, involving legal, what you need to do for disclosures, if there's regulators involved? These are things you need to start to think about, because it's not just the ransomware and getting your data back. Now it's the name and shame. So again, can't stop everything, but we got to continue to have that plan. And again, today, start putting things in your file cabinet, tools in your tool chest, start thinking about the different things. So name and shaming is another one that we've seen pretty prevalent now. So now what I want to do is kind of talk about the anatomy of attack. We talked about how it's already changed from mass distribution and the single users to now moving more towards targeting businesses. And you see right here, it's very interesting. Dwell times ranging from an hour to 303 days. So what does that tell you? It means you need to be able to respond quickly, but you also need to be able to detect it, because the longer they can stay in your system, the more damage, quote unquote, they can do, the more data exfiltration. As you follow the path here, this is where I want you to think about what Don also talked about layers and rings of security, as we're mentioning. You have the initial access, the discovery, the lateral movement, the persistence. Okay, these are all steps that the threat actor is going through. These are their playbooks that they're going through. This is their dwell time that you're in your system. These are chances for you to discover them. And obviously, the quicker you can discover them, the less pain that you will have inflicted on your organization. The quicker you can detect it, the quicker you can move to mitigating. So it's important to understand that. And as you see, data exfiltration, which I do want to say is not in every single ransomware case. So I don't want to give you the perception that every single ransomware case does involve data exfiltration, but it does in a lot of these cases we've seen, and we've seen them using it, as I said, in kind of the name and shame. Next is a ransomware deployment. Now business's decision to negotiate or not, and we can kind of talk about that as we go forward, and then obviously payment as well. So there's a lot of time to discover if we're moving towards the 303 days, not a lot in the hour. So again, we want those layers and rings of security to kind of send up those flags at every step of the way.
Wow, thanks, Kevin. So, I mean, that's some pretty sobering stuff, and you know, stuff, of course, that we get the opportunity or the unfortunate opportunity to work with each day and help clients. But along those lines, Don, can you talk a little bit about how small and medium-sized businesses deal with this, or what they face in meeting these threats from your perspective?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So there's some pretty significant mistakes that a lot of companies make that results in, you know, hair bursting into flames and mayhem and everything else. Number one is just not doing anything, right? Number one is really kind of ad hoc. Maybe, you know, maybe I have this, maybe I have that, but not really taking the threat of ransomware particularly seriously on the high end of likelihood, maybe. And so not really doing anything about it, because, you know, that's when you're really blindsided. Those are the panicked calls that I get from clients or clients that know somebody that find our number. Now, another mistake though is companies are doing something about this, about ransomware and other cyber threats, but they're trying to do it on their own without some kind of reliable 24/7 component to the equation. And as Kevin has put out pretty clearly, the criminals are working on their offense relentlessly, 24/7 in some cases. So, I mean, that ends up being kind of dead zones, really, in coverage. You know, also the defense needs to be able to meet the challenge. And unless you're a cybersecurity focused company, you do this day in and day out, it can be very, very hard to stay ahead of it. I mean, people are already busy, really busy, typically. You know, what I hear almost every day from the small and mid-sized companies is these folks are wearing a lot of hats, a lot of things dumped in their lap day in and day out. And so, you know, they're just really kind of trying to keep up and keep their head above water. So, you know, I think that it really does take a holistic effort, people and policy and process and technology, 24/7 defense to really combat this. And it's very, very often just not feasible for a smaller mid-sized company to build it out organically without some help. That's some of the main stuff I see.
So you mean that? Yeah, so you're saying that the ransomware threat actors aren't just working 8 to 5 Central Time?
Typically, no. Usually it's coming in the morning and trying to turn on your computer that you first learned that something happened overnight. That's what I hear a lot.
Got it. So what should small and medium-sized businesses particularly know about what to expect, like, so they get hit by ransomware? So describe that bad day / horrible day, as we talk about in the title of this webinar.
Well, it's really bad. I don't know that a lot of people really realize or thinking about the feeling of helplessness that happens if ransomware hits, and you're not prepared for it. The calls start coming in, people can't access their files, they've been hit, but there's no one. Everyone's just looking at you now. There's no one in your corner per se. They're looking at you to handle it. And you know, I think I've talked to a lot of people. They start Googling and trying to figure out who can help them, and talking with some other vendors or companies that they don't really know very well, or maybe aren't particularly experts, kind of hoping to get a referral to somebody that can help them. And then there's paperwork and contracts that have to happen, and there's the kind of the things to consider when it comes to cyber insurance, and what you can do and what you can't do to keep from negating all your insurance coverage really in the first place. And you know, so it's just I mean, the clock is ticking, and there's all these things going on. I've heard it described as similar to the experience you would imagine if you have a child at the playground and you turn your back for 10 seconds, you turn around and you can't find them. Right? That's how it's been described to me. You know, at that point in time, the hackers, they're in complete control, and the victim, you're flailing around trying to figure out what to do, getting your plans, and just completely trying to set things up. And it takes a while to level set. It takes a while to start to have that come together, and it's a powerless feeling.
Gotcha. And so that's the horrible day scenario. So let's talk a little bit. So I got this slide here that sort of shows the different layers. And so describe what a not necessarily good day, but a less horrible day might look like, or walk us through this layer of protections that we recommend that folks exercise.
Yeah, you know, absolutely. And I mean, the layers make sense, right? Because there's several points along the way that an attack like this can be stopped or can be avoided, or something along those lines. And first and foremost, most of the attacks come through a phishing email. And so number one, let's deploy technology and sandboxing and to make sure that we are getting the instances of phishing emails that have links to click on or attachments to open. Just have them not show up in the user's email box at all, right? So that's number one. Let's just get rid of as much as we possibly can there. Now, in the instances, some of it's going to slip through. How about we help our employees to be less likely to click on, right? So user awareness training and the human side of it. And how do we make sure that if something does slip through, they're not clicking on it? Invariably, somebody might, even with the training. And if they do, then what? You know, that's when you get to the endpoint. You have some kind of you know, endpoint detection and advanced capabilities at your endpoint, so that you can keep it from getting as bad as it can get, quite frankly, and making sure that we can stop it in its tracks once it gets to that point, and then avoid damage to the extent that we can. Now, but you know, I think defense in depth, a multi-layered security strategy, is always kind of taking the point of view that something's going to fail, and then what? And then what's going to happen? And so you get all the way to the end point, and maybe we've missed something. Let's make sure we're monitoring all of our logs in our environment. Let's make sure that like, as far as a SOC, as far as SIM and activity and behavioral monitoring and all of those different pieces, let's be monitoring that, looking for not just ransomware, but all kinds of potential elements that could be coming up and, you know, attacking in one way or another. And so, and then finally is the last ditch, incident response. But let's make sure that we're ready for that. Let's not figure out our incident response plan and our playbook while we're in the middle of this kind of emergency, right? Let's know what our plan is going to be, who gets called, in what circumstances, what steps do you have to take so your insurance will continue to work, what kind of opportunities do you have for you know, disaster recovery and business continuity and all those other things. And so, and then who's going to come in and actually dig through? Who's going to be the one that does the forensic analysis and figure out, you know, how do we get it out? How do we figure out how this happened in the first place? How do we keep this from happening again? So, you know, I think it kind of seems like a lot, I guess, when you talk about all these layers together in this way. But you know, it's really not. And it's a lot of peace of mind, really. And you know, with the capability of managed services that exist, I mean, there's a lot more that a small team can accomplish to when it comes to ransomware, you know, myriad other kind of threats. So so anyway, that's what we're seeing. That's what we're recommending is on each layer, and it's you know, so far so good, right? It tends to be very effective.
Great. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and launch a another poll question here real quick. Here we go. So for those folks who are out there, you personally know of a small or medium-sized business that has been hit by ransomware, and if so, what was the result? And we've seen a little bit of everything on the scale here. We've seen folks be able to weather it, and then I've heard of companies completely going out of business. Or there was one story of a doctor, a pediatrician that got hit. He was going to retire in 3 to 4 years, and he just decided when he got hit with ransomware to hang it up that day, essentially, and go ahead and retire because it wasn't worth it. So we've seen everything on the spectrum here, but interested in seeing what kind of responses we end up getting. Okay, I think we have a quorum, so I'll go ahead and share that. And so yeah, so it looks like nobody's really seen anything fatal, but a lot of folks have heard of people having a challenging time or weathering it pretty well. So good stuff. What I want to do right now is ask a couple of quick questions, and you know, Kevin, you alluded to, you know, these threat actors, and you know, when this happens, should companies engage the threat actors, and if so, when?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, that's a business decision. And now I do want to touch on the survey real quick. I
Sure.
think the high percentages are kind of what I expected. Somewhat high of no, and then challenging time recovery, because, and again, the term challenging is relative, but I'm sure anybody who's gone through that would say that it's challenging. But I want to build on a couple things Don said, especially with the no, and especially we talked about layers and ring security and defense in depth. The one thing to understand is that it's not an if, it's a when you're going to suffer some type of incident. Doesn't mean it's necessarily going to be ransomware. And hopefully, if you've applied those layers that Don's talked about, that's caught early on. You know, talked about the threat actors, you know, not having a 9-to-5 job. Remember, all of us on this call today have to get it right every single day. The threat actors have to get it right once. So that's the other thing to keep in mind. So just because you have not been a victim of it, don't think that you're not. And the last thing I want to make sure also is that you're not thinking that I wouldn't be a target. I know we'll talk about targeting in a second, but just interesting on those surveys. So kind of balance those two things. As far as engaging with the threat actors, you know, this is again, it's a business decision. We can't tell you what to do, but I can tell you and provide a little insight on what we've seen in some of the engagements and understand some of the potential risks. So let's start. Let's put yourself in the situation. Your company has now been a victim of ransomware, right? You have the ransomware note, you have a way to contact the threat actors, and the question is, do I do it now? Well, you have to weigh a couple of things. What we have seen is that when you do contact the threat actors, often a clock starts. So they're going to say, okay, you now have 72 hours, you now have 7 days, you now have this determined amount of time to make the decision, or A, we're going to destroy the key and you're never going to get your data back, or B, the demand is going to go up. So it's important to kind of understand where you are in the situation and kind of understand how affected your business is. And that just doesn't mean that your files are encrypted. You want to understand the scope of this attack. Have they been in your system for the 200 days? Do they have access? Do they have active directory domain controls, domain credentials? You know, you want to understand it. So you got to have a little bit of understanding before you engage them, because if they say 72 hours, you may not even be ready to make a business decision one way or the other without understanding the scope. So the next question is, if not right away, then when? Well, again, this is tricky. Again, there's a fine line that you don't want to cross. You want to have that line of, we don't really need help, to, oh, we tried everything and we're desperate now. So there's the fine line you got to balance as well. So again, I don't have a magic 8-ball that, or a calendar that says this is it. But there's times that it's gone about a week and no contact with the threat actors and then reaching out to them. That's where you're kind of figuring out if you wait. I have seen threat actors turn around and ask for an exorbitant amount of money to understand that, because now they think you're in a situation that you can't handle. And here's another thing that's important about contact with threat actors. On those same lines, your system's been compromised. So until you know what's going on, you have to assume everything has been compromised. I do want to talk about secure communications when you're involved in an incident, because we have seen situations where your communications, whether your email, we had a company that was using single-factor authentication communication platform, and we advised them not to use that for their internal conversations. We advise them to go to a secure multi-factor authentication communication platform. They were recovering pretty well. They were doing pretty well, and it looked like they were going to be able to get back up and running, and did not want to pay the threat actors. However, they then hit a potential snag, and I don't need to belabor and go into it, but it turned for the worse, where they were not going to be able to recover systems that they thought they were going to recover, and now they were in trouble, and now they're communicating, hey, we're in a bind here. You know what? We need to start talking to threat actors. Well, they go back to the threat actors, and immediately the demand was doubled. Now, I can't say that they had access into that single-factor authentication communication, but again, you have to assume that they have access to your environment. So your own internal communications, you want to make sure for that. So again, another thing to put in your filing cabinet, another tool for your tool chest. How are you going to communicate when you have this incident? Do you have a plan for that? If your email is down, how are you going to communicate with everybody? So again, as we talked about in the beginning, don't just listen to these stories. Now put yourself in it. Go, oh yeah, this is our platform. We have a multi-factor authentication. This is how we're going to do it. I know who to call in addition to communicating. So another thing to keep in mind, as I said, is secure communications as well.
Outstanding. And can you talk a little bit about, whether you see mostly targeted attacks or opportunistic? Are folks going directly at one company, or is it kind of a mix, or are people just kind of luck of the draw or unluck of the draw, as the case might be?
Yeah, as you can imagine, this is a question we get with almost every single engagement. Were we targeted? Were they coming after us? And so I kind of flip the question around and say, well, what's your definition of targeted? I mean, are you saying targeted meaning they were coming after your company at all costs and we're going to continue to come after you until they get in? We don't see that very often. We do. That's usually nation state, and that's not necessarily always about money. Sometimes it's more about sabotage. So for those targeted attacks, you don't see as many of those. But how about targeted where they've scanned and see your company has vulnerabilities, and now they do a little research on your company and go, this might be a good one. That targeted? Yes. How about where they have created spoofed emails, again, as Don talked about, to try and get in through a phishing campaign and saying, oh, let's go after this company? Would that be targeted? Yeah, I would say that also. So define targeted and find your comfort level of where you want to call it targeted or opportunistic. Everybody always thinks they are targeted, though, and I do think it is more opportunistic. So what I don't want is people falling into, they're going to look at our company and they're not going to want to come after us. When they get their hooks into somebody, and again, whether it's phishing, whether however else they get in and get access, now they take a look and go, oh, let me take a shot. And remember what I said with ransomware inflation. They can throw their hooks in and they can encrypt your data, and if you don't come back to them, it doesn't matter, because when they're getting 40 million on one or 10 million on the other, it really doesn't matter. They're going to try, see if they get you to pay money. If not, they don't care. But again, I just want to go back to what everybody says about targeted. We had a company, again, we talked about secure communications. We didn't know how long they were in their system for. And now they decided to engage the threat actors after about 5 or 6 days. And the ransom demand comes back at $9.5 million, okay, which happened to be the exact amount that their cyber insurance was for. So they were convinced this was a targeted attack. They were in our system. They knew the exact amount. Turns out through the investigation, it was an employee searching for cars and collect a malicious Google Chrome update. And that's how they got the access, and that's how they got in. So it was not a targeted attack. It was opportunistic, and it goes back to everything that Don talked about. And we talk about people and emails and things like that. And I talk about the inevitability of the click, the biggest fear of all times. So again, the two things to take away from this: yes, there are targeted attacks when they see an opportunity to get in. You become more of a target when they are in, but they are scanning to see who they can get in, because they'll just try and determine where they can get the most money from. And if you're not going to engage with them, they'll move on to the next one. It's no worse off for them. So with that survey saying, no, you don't know anybody, please just don't think you're not a target, because most of them really are opportunistic, and that opportunity as a result of the vulnerabilities that your system has. So if I'm going to say there's targeting, they're targeting the vulnerabilities. So just keep that in the back of your mind.
Gotcha. And we even saw with the Colonial Pipeline, incident where the hackers actually apologized, half apologized afterwards for hitting that specific target because they weren't trying to make a political statement. They said, look, we're just criminals, and we're going to find different ones to hit from now on that aren't that hot button, geopolitically or whatever the case might be. So Kevin, you've been Secret Service, have that background. A lot of people wonder, should I go to the cops? That's that's one of the first things folks say is, do you or don't you go to law enforcement? Do you go talk to Secret Service or FBI? What would you say in response to that question?
Well, again, my response is going to be yes. That's kind of where I was. Again, it's a business decision. I think it's important to understand some of the myths, though. That's really the important aspect to understand when engaging law enforcement. As I said, I spent 23 and a half years with the Secret Service. The one thing that people need to understand is in my entire career, I never spoke to a regulator. I never had a call from a regulator. It's just not something that law enforcement is going to do, is going to go deal with regulators. The kind of the mantra from the law enforcement world is you don't want to re-victimize the victim. So that's really important not to do that. So you need to have that trust relationship. But this goes back to the other things. I think what would help is if you establish these relationships beforehand. Again, you don't want to exchange business cards when your hair is on fire. So if you know who your FBI contact is, know who your Secret Service contact is, wherever you are in the area. And now you're going to have that trusted law enforcement partner that you can kind of have that relationship. And again, when your hair's on fire, trying to figure out who to call can be challenging. So I think there are certain benefits. There are times when law enforcement can tell you that they've seen these attacks before. They can tell you what the next steps are. I know personally I was involved with one. Now, this was not ransomware. This was a financial attack, and it started as a DDoS attack, and they really just used that as a diversion because they had access to their system on a Friday afternoon, and then started all financial transactions. So when we were called and said, hey, by this company, and said, we're not really sure why we're getting a DDoS attack, we're like, check your financial records. And sure enough, they had now transactions that were initiated kind of as a diversion. So law enforcement can tell you the things they've seen. They can tell you what's next. They can give you indicators of compromise. The thing to understand is they're not going to be able to go out tomorrow and to put handcuffs on somebody. And here's the tough part for everybody to understand. There is an ounce of the greater good contacting law enforcement. By what I mean by that is they're going to aggregate everything together for an investigation. And you're not sure which IP from what attack or other IOC indicator of compromise that you're going to be able to use to go after these people. Now, there are success, and we have apprehended people. They take longer, but it is really for the greater good. So I would say you're better off engaging them to understand. And I'll leave it with this on the flip side to that. If you are going to be asked, if this does come out publicly, you will most certainly be asked the question, or have you engaged law enforcement? They don't ask you what level you've engaged them. They've asked, have you engaged them? So if you do know those contacts beforehand, I would encourage everybody to go reach out and get those local contacts. And if you've reached out to them, then you have engaged law enforcement. And then you decide how you want to engage from there. But the things I want to say is engage. It's going to protect you if you're asked that question. not going to re-victimize the victim, and I would not worry about regulators as far as that goes. As far as law enforcement, that's not something that they're involved with.
That's awesome. That's very insightful. Thanks, Kevin. And Don, I got a question for you as far as, we've talked about the kind of myth that we've found in talking to these small businesses that, that they can handle it internally, that they can have all these things in place. And what are you seeing as far as, folks being stretched? Have you seen, technology bought and not used properly? Have folks come to you after telling you we had it handled and asking you for assistance? And how do you recommend that they approach getting the resources to meet all these varied demands, from technological to logistical to 24/7 service?
Yeah, well, there's a lot to that question. I think ultimately there's a lot of questionable decisions that are made when you're panicked. And so, I think that when you're talking about technology, when you're talking about somebody who's not prepared, who doesn't believe, the classic risk, equation where you have the threat, you have the cost, and you have your exposure to it, and you have the likelihood. Well, people are like, okay, maybe I have exposure, maybe it would cost a lot, but no, the likelihood's not very high. And so those are the ones that end up being kind of the most panicked. I think that you buy technology that you don't end up using in a lot of cases. You're engaging incident responders that may or may not be able to make any kind of progress because you haven't really vetted them very well. You are at huge risk of taking some steps that are going to negate your insurance, which I mentioned before, and because we've seen that be a big thing. So, I think that far and away, if you can get this all planned out first and get it tested and make sure that everyone knows exactly what to do, and very often, considering all the hats that, and I work with a lot of different kind of companies, but I work with a whole lot of government contractors and a whole lot of DoD contractors, and they're really running lean. And so, getting some help, getting this infrastructure set up, and in the case of a DoD contractor or some other regulated industry, doing that in a way that's going to align to finances, going to align to legal, going to align to compliance requirements, and having that all set up in the first, it's not going to, ransomware is never a good day. Any of these attacks are never a good day, as you guys have been saying on and on. But man, does it change the nature of that response? We provide a lot of services to clients in cybersecurity, and you can never guarantee nothing's ever going to happen, but we can say that we have not had these kind of attacks to our clients while they're being protected by Managed Security. So that's a record we want to keep up. definitely want to keep up with. I hope I answered at least most of your question there, Cliff.
You did. I did the whole Billy Madison one question with 32 subparts thing, so that I gave you enough to talk about. So Kevin, back to you. I had a quick question. So you've seen a lot of folks get ransomware from the incident responder side and everything else. How long does it usually take to recover?
Well, I can assure you that everyone will answer not quick enough. It takes longer than they would want it to. I'm not sure anybody from a ransomware attack is like, well, that wasn't bad. We need to put it in perspective. We have had some companies recover quickly and others that have taken months and months and months and months. I will talk about what has helped, and it kind of piggybacks off what Don said, is the preparation, robust backups that have been segmented and air gapped. We see a difference from companies that their hair is on fire or not. But it is important to remember, even if you have the best backup in the world, okay, and you can restore from backup, you still need to do an investigation to figure out how these threat actors got inside your system. If you just restore and have no idea how they got in, what the scope of the breach was, and where they've been, whether there was data exfiltration or not, you could be right back in the same position you were when you started. So it's important to know that this is not a 24, 48-hour turnaround process. You can restore to an insecure environment and run that risk. And we've had companies that were losing $10 million a day and said, hey, we're going to restore and we'll investigate afterwards and roll the dice. I mean, that's a possibility as well. The other thing I do want to say is, even if you do pay for the decryption tool, there's a couple of things to understand about that. It's not press a button and everything comes right back. It's a very slow and tedious process. You want to verify, obviously, that the decryption tool is going to work and actually that there's not anything else malicious in it. So that's even before you get going. The next thing is, we've seen about an 85% success rate of the decryption tool. Threat actors put a lot more time into encrypting than they do decrypting. Haven't seen really a rhyme or reason as to what is decrypted or what's not. So don't think just because you're paying for it that you're going to get everything back and everything's up and running and you're going to be great also. So another thing to keep in mind, that it's not fast and it's not always perfect as far as that goes.
Good. And when we talked on Monday, you shared some pretty cool stories around this. Do you have companies that were able to actually decrypt without paying the ransom?
Yeah, there's a couple of different things. First, going back to law enforcement, there's one where we actually had the decryption key and it was not released at that time, had not been made public. That is not very often, so I don't want you to think that law enforcement's always going to have a decryption key. And you may be asking, wait, why didn't you release it? Well, if you release it, then the threat actors are going to change right away and you won't be able to use it. And it's not like we were holding on to it or was being held on to so we can decrypt everybody that's infected. It's still part of an ongoing investigation and was part of that. So that's a good feel-good story when we were able to decrypt it there for them. Next, we talk about how hard these threat actors work. They're not always the smartest. I mean, there's times they made mistakes. We had 2 companies that were infected and the threat actors got lazy and used the exact same encryption key for both. And so when we looked at the file, we looked at the hash, we realized that it was the same. So I like to call that one our Taco Tuesday or 2 for Tuesday, because there was one payment made and both companies were able to decrypt it, which was good. And lastly, and this was a couple of years ago, it was a small police department that was infected and they had 8 different servers. And the threat actors, as a proof of concept, said they would decrypt one server for them to let them know that, yes, we are who we say we are. And yes, we can do what we say we do. So they're like, okay, server number 6 or whatever. So they decrypted it and gave it back. Well, they didn't know, threat actors didn't know that the department gave them the system that had their backups on, and they decrypted their backups for them. So not the smartest, but a good story nonetheless.
Nice. And the fact that it's 2021 means that we can't possibly make it through a webinar without saying the C word. So, in the past year with COVID going on, have you seen a rise in attacks or have you seen anything as far as folks working more remote and things like that? What are you seeing as far as the impacts that the workforce working remotely has had on ransomware?
Yeah, many companies were forced to completely overhaul their business operations without going through the proper change management process. So for those companies that went remote, 100% remote quickly, keep in mind, we talked about planning and having a plan. Do you have a plan? Has your plan adapted to the way your workforce is now, the way you're operating? That's really important that we've seen struggle to respond. We've seen challenges where you don't have as many resources, you don't have the people to put actual hands on keyboard, you're not even sure where some of your physical assets are, all because of COVID. We did see an increase in financial fraud as well, but obviously exploiting the vulnerabilities from ransomware as well.
Good. And we have a question, another question from the audience, which I think is a great one. They said, the government states that they're against paying ransomware attackers. You hear that time and time again, that they recommend that you don't. But recent news states that companies are still doing that and still paying. Where do you think the disconnect is, or what do you think the messaging might be, or why do you think it might be the way it is?
Well, I mean, I can give you the government's position. I was in it for a long time and could give you exactly what the point is. The point is, there's a bunch of reasons. Number one, you don't know who you're dealing with. You don't know if the threat actors are going to give you a decryption key. You don't know if it's going to work. So you have those factors. Again, here's another aspect. You're now showing a propensity to pay as well. So if I can get back in your system or somebody else gets back in your system, you've shown a propensity to pay. So for those things alone, you recommend against it. And you're furthering the crime. You're showing that this is a profitable crime. So, hey, this is a good business model. Let me stay in here and keep encrypting more people and getting more people to pay. Why do people pay? It's a business decision. Lack of preparedness, we see companies that have no option but to get their data back without paying. So that's the challenge. So if you want to come first full circle here, and with everything Don's talked about preparedness, about your layers and rings of security, your defense in depth, I mean, that's it. Prepare for it. So again, it's a business decision. Government doesn't want to do it for the reasons I said. Companies do it because they feel they have no option.
Gotcha. Thanks for that. And Don, as far as, the cost of prevention versus the cost of cure, when you're talking to these small, medium-sized businesses, they are, of course, cash conscious and things like that. But, as somebody who prices out services and knows the exact cost, what is your reaction to, the cost of prevention versus cure in the case of ransomware?
Well, so that's an interesting. I mean, Kevin has mentioned a lot of times that's a business decision. But one of the conversations that we're having with our clients are, really kind of value justification, if you will. What is the potential loss? What are you looking to lose, or what are you looking to potentially gain, and how do we quantify that? And if we can quantify that in some way that's reasonable, and then from a preventative standpoint, we're only spending a fraction of that, then you're a long way down the road. I think it really depends on the attack as to how much the attackers are going to ask for. And I've seen relatively low in the thousands, and I've seen much higher with some of the clients who call me. What I've also seen, that Kevin mentioned this, and I forgot to mention it as well. I've seen several instances of people who thought that they had everything cleaned up, and ultimately what they had done is restored into an infected environment and had it persist and had it come back. More often than you might want to think about, actually. It's pretty common, and I think if I were, I hate to say if I were an attacker, but I'm sure those attackers, if they're going to get in once, they're also going to try to make sure that they've got a way to get in again. It would appear that that's what they do. So, I think the biggest difference in cost, Cliff, is probably going to be costs you can anticipate versus potential costs that you can't, because there's going to be costs more than just the ransom. You've got the ransom that you pay. You've got productivity from whatever period of time. You've got maybe there's data that you don't get back. Maybe there's a compromise of something proprietary. Maybe, it's really hard to quantify the cost. So I think the ransom is probably like the lowest part of the cost, really, if you're thinking about all of it in total. So, I think that's the main. Peace of mind is worth a lot of money, and if you can have costs that you can anticipate and you can budget for, and you can work into your operational expenses, and capital expenses, or however you need to do that, that's a much easier pill to swallow. And there's business conversations that can be had about what the risk is, how much we can afford to spend on an ongoing basis, and anticipate that, as opposed to the shocker and the huge amount of unknown if one of these attacks happens. So that's what we're seeing. That's what we're seeing. I say in the real world. Kevin's is much more the real world. He's like the seedy underbelly of the real world. The people that I talk to are just trying to do their jobs, man. And that's it.
Yeah, I'll add to that. I will tell you this. Especially for the people who are not able to get the security budget they wanted, and everybody is usually asking for stuff. I mean, everybody wants things, but they run into these challenges. I will say this: I've seen many, and never let a good incident go to waste when you need something, because I have not encountered anybody that has not now improved their security after paying for the large amount of money to deal with an incident on the back end. And I don't think there's a single victim out there that didn't wish they did something more on the front end. And so, yeah, it's hard to listen when you don't think you're a target or you haven't seen it happen to you. Again, it's hard to realize it. But that call that comes in on Friday night, systems are starting to encrypt when you were planning to go home and start your weekend. It is challenging.
Gotcha. All right. Well, I thank everybody for participating, Kevin and Don. It's been a pleasure talking with you both. We hope everybody found this informative and got you thinking about how you would address ransomware defense. I'd invite you to schedule a session with us to discuss your current posture. And you can do that by reaching out to www.madsecurity.com and selecting contact us, or you can hit me up directly as well, cliff@madsecurity.com. But we would love to talk to you. And again, Kevin and Don, I want to thank you all very much and appreciate it. And everybody have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you, everybody, very much.
Out here.